Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Cupcake gift certificate? From me. From my
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to those here and those watching to the Tuesday, December 17th informational meeting. We will call this meeting to order and start out with a report from the CVB bid board by Councillor Brecky. Hi, Councillor Brecky, you are on. That meeting was canceled? Well, that's a good review. So we're good. So we'll move on to the Metro Management Council meeting, and I don't know if Councillor Erickson or I believe Councillor Kylie will take the lead on that.
Thank you very much. We had our regular Metro Management Council meeting on Wednesday, December 11th. The previous Friday we'd had a special meeting, which I gave a report on. We had, in addition to, we had an additional discussion on agency facilities. I'll get to that in a second. We had the director's report. We set the 2020 meeting schedule. We approved 8 hours of administrative pay for individuals working on Christmas Eve this year, so which is a nice gesture for those that are working 24 hours, 7 days a week. Then we also approved resolution number 1903, the non-bargaining unit pay, as well as resolution 1904 dealing with surplus property. Another approval of resolution 1905 dealing with employee benefits, and actually the rates came across better than they had anticipated. We adopted the personnel manual revision, as well as the Minnehaha County Metro lease agreement as well too. With the agency facilities discussion, the previous Friday, Councillor Staley had asked about the breakdown of money and where it comes from. And the breakdown is 75% of the Metro 911 emergency services, 75% comes from city, 25% from county, and then we also get money from the state along with every line that we have as far as our cell phone lines and landlines and so forth. Then other examples of what we're considering doing here included, there was a brief presentation. The Law Enforcement Center is an example of a cooperative agreement between City of Sioux Falls and the county. It's a city-owned facility, and then the county is basically leasing space from us. The Human Services and Health Center is just the opposite. That's county-owned, and the city leases space from the county. The museum storage facility that was built here just in the last couple of years is another example. That's a county-owned and operated facility, and the City of Sioux Falls made a one-time cash contribution to that. So the potential Metro 911 PSAP would be similar to those previous projects, where in this case we would envision it being city-owned facility, and the county, hopefully as we did with the museum facility, would be able to make a one-time cash contribution to its, and then pay a lease as we pay a lease on the current facilities with Metro 911 facilities. I made the motion, and I made the motion to move forward with schematic design of Metro 911 PSAP in conjunction with the design of the public safety training facility, and that was voted and passed unanimously by those present. There were 3 of us present. There were 2 individuals that were absent from this particular meeting. So I'm open to take, and that, we will most likely see, and we had some of us had a discussion in a meeting this afternoon that they would be bringing forward the schematic design contract from WSKF, who are the architects that are working on the public safety facility, that we would have to amend that contract, and that most likely would be brought forward to this full body at some point in January then, for us to authorize the amendment of the schematic drawings. That would eventually lead to, at a later date, assuming that we amended that contract, it would lead to a later date where you would eventually select a contract, but that's not going to happen, or a architect, but that's not going to happen until bonds are approved as well too. So there's a number of steps that have to go through, but since this is something that the city is working on, it would come before just the city council for that amendment of the schematic drawings.
All right, thank you, sir. Anything to add to that? No, we're good. Any questions? All right, we'll move on to city council open discussion, if anybody has anything. Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. I have two things just to mention. One, we all got an email about the liquor sting that was done on December 16th. Just want to report that all 24 have passed. I know it's kind of a weird time when they come in front of us and we ask what you're going to do and how you're going to retain employees and make sure you don't sell to underage, but I think it was exciting to know that all 24 passed this last go around. The second thing, as the Municipal League board member, I had meetings last week in Pierre. They're very productive. A lot of the times when we meet, we then focus on joining forces with the county. Much of the times when we have those legislative joint items, we talk a lot about that as well. I will tell you that not every county and every municipality have as productive of a relationship as we do with the two counties that Sioux Falls sits in. And so it was very eye-opening to see some of those relationships kind of unfold and some of the barriers come down, to be honest. Will Mortensen led the discussion. We had a discussion for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then followed by a social and a dinner for many of the folks from different counties across the state to meet with many of the different municipality board members. We did do a legislative overview as far as some of the bills that Yvonne is bringing and is also playing some defense to. They showed great interest in the liquor license changes that we just made, and some of the other municipalities are looking at what we did coming at that 10-year mark to maybe make some potential changes in their city as well. And then we also discussed the EAB. At one point there was a desire to have EAB banned sales throughout the whole state of South Dakota. I will send you all an email from Mr. Ball, John Ball, who gave some insight to that as far as why it might not be a good idea and how it's already being quarantined in those counties that are already impacted. And so some good information out there, and important for us to be reaching out to our partners in other areas. And that was about the gist of it.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Staley.
Just wanted to give a little insight to the citizens watching as to what kind of homework we do here on the council. I spent an hour and a half Saturday night watching the Planning Commission meeting, talking about this a rezone that we're going to be considering tonight. And wow, that was so educational to watch the dialogue from the citizens living in that area and the staff and the Planning Commission. And there's no way you can replicate that information unless you actually watch it. I had other things to do Saturday night, but this was something I needed to do because we're going to be asked to vote on this issue. And then Sunday morning, after I was done directing the choir at church, I drove over there and got into the pickup with Neil Anderson and spent another hour driving around actually looking at the dirt road that they're dealing with as their secondary access point, seeing the area where they were supposed to have a road put in, and actually getting the information from the perspective of the residents who live there. Did I have other things to do on Sunday? Of course I did, but I had to do this because we're going to be voting on it. And I got feedback from people that they're contacting council members and they don't even get a phone call back. And that's the problematic thing for me in this job is that, you know, I feel like I have to reach out and I have to respond, and other people don't. And maybe they've got some kind of supernatural awareness of what's happening, but I'm just telling you, if you don't watch those meetings and actually talk to the people impacted, you can't make the best decision. So just wanted to, that's what we call homework. That's called doing it outside of the confines of this chamber. There's a lot of hours that we put in, reaching out, listening, helping, and doing our representative job for the citizens.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll move into our presentations for the day. The first one by Director Pritchett, the November 2019 financials. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Sean Pritchett with the Department of Finance. So I'm bringing forward the November monthly financial report. This will be the last one until we get through year end. So this will give you kind of the last snapshot we have until we complete and close the books for the year. I feel sometimes like I'm a broken record here reviewing some of these items, but there hasn't been a lot of material changes in terms of the economics we see here. We continue to see the strong employment with unemployment did tick up to 2.4%, but again, it was only 2.3% last month, so very consistent with our prior ones, consistently below the statewide average, and about 1% below where we are nationally as well. Labor force did tick up a little bit. We did see a decrease over the last couple of months. That's fairly common seasonality that we see during those particular months. So we see some uptick in that as we go into the holiday season. And we do see labor force and employment has grown about 3% since October of 2018. Inflation, we do see a slight uptick there. We were at 1.8% last month. We are now up to 2.1% overall. This is driven in large part by energy sector that has been negative all year. It's slightly less negative now. And you can see in terms of all items and then food and all other items, they have been ranging in that 2 to 2.3% range. So still within a very healthy range overall with wanting to stay in that 2% region. As far as building valuations, we've had about $730 million in building permits and valuations come in through November of 2019. We obviously had a very strong month in the month of October, which saw the Jefferson High School and another building permit for the first premier headquarters coming through. November was more of a typical month with about a $33 million increase in valuation. But through November, total valuations compared to last year, we are only down about $5 million from where we were last year. So, and that of course was a record year. And versus where we've been 2 years ago, we're actually $66 million ahead through November where we were 2 years ago. So overall, it's been a very positive year in terms of the valuations. That's been driven primarily by the new commercial valuations that have been coming in. The office, institutional, and educational sector is up about 63% since November of last year. And then, of course, as we've seen all year long, the strip malls, hotels, and restaurants category or other commercial continues to be up as well. That's up about 45% from where we were last year, up 85% from where we were 2 years ago. As far as new residential, that continues to be down. It's a trend we have seen all year. We're about 4% behind where we were last year, and this has been driven primarily by multifamily units, which is down about 49% from where we were 2 years ago, down about 38% from where we were last year. Taking a look at those building permit numbers in terms of the housing and actual units that have been permitted, no real change from the trending we've seen all year long. A total of 1,534 units have been permitted through November. That includes 602 single-family housing units, 579 multifamily housing units, and 353 townhome units. As far as single family and townhomes, we're down in unit-wise about 8% from where we've been last year, or 8 to 9%. But the apartments, we are down, currently down about 38% from where we were last year. So again, we're continuing to see a reduction in that area as we see more absorption from the increased building that we've had over the last probably 5 years or so. As far as sales tax collection, the news continues to be positive here in terms of what we're seeing. We had 6.2% growth in November over November of last year, probably slightly higher than what we had expected. We had a very strong month last year. November was up 9%, so to get above that took a bit of a stretch, but we really had some positive news in that regard. We continue to be growing year to date, or excuse me, the 12-month rolling average is currently at 6%. If you compare that to last year, we were at 4.5% for the whole year. In September, when we had reworked the numbers in our projections, we had projected a 5% growth rate for October through December and ending the year at about 5.9%. So we're very consistent with what our expectations have been in terms of where we'll land with the general operating fund. Entertainment tax collections have also been positive. We saw a 14.1% increase in November of 2019 versus November of 2018. That's actually the largest increase we've seen on a month-over-month basis since December of 2016, when it was 16%. So it was a very strong month overall. We probably had some low growth months, as you can see, over the last 4 months, so it was positive to see that growth come back here in November, and we're actually getting the rolling month, 12-month average back to about 6%, which is where it was this last summer. As far as where our revenues are coming in year to date, we are about 92% of the way through the year. Through November, we are about 95% collected on our anticipated revenues through the year. If you compare that to last year, we were at 91%, so we are ahead of that. I think something to take into consideration here, though, is primarily on the property tax side. Property taxes, we're about at 94% of what our budget expectations were. At the same time last year, we are at 85%. So I think we had some trailing revenues that were coming in December of last year that we probably won't see this year. So I think this is more of a timing thing than anything. And I think we're probably consistent with where we were in terms of our overall revenue. Sales taxes are 96% of budget. This is the same as where we were last year. We were at 96% collected through November at that point. So again, we've had some strong sales tax revenues coming in for this year so far. On the expenditure side, we're very consistent with where we were last year as well. We are 84% expended through the year. Again, we're 92% through the year. We're at 84% of budget. That's exactly where we were last year. It's very consistent with where our expectations are. We're in pretty good shape in regard to most of our departments being well within what their expectations for expenditures were. Of course, highways and streets has been the one that has been consistently higher throughout the year, and that's been prompted by the snow removal and, of course, the contingent appropriations request or conditional one that you had passed here within the last 2 months. So aside from that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but it's been a pretty straightforward month overall.
All right, thanks, Director. Any questions? Councilor Sale.
Thank you. Director Pritchard, on your monthly status report, on the page when you get into revenues, and I know we've touched on this a little bit before, federal and state grants, the current budget was for 5.5 million, and we've got 253,000 coming in. And if you scroll, I'll ask in the same part. Contributions budget was over 3 million. We have 172. So combined, we are down about $8 million. Could you comment a little bit about where we are and the status of that?
Yeah, on the grant side, I think again this deals a lot with the Federal Transit Administration grants, and we usually get them very late in the year. So I don't think there's anything there that is particularly concerning yet to us that I'm aware of. What was the other category you had spoken of?
Contributions, sir.
Oh, looking for it. I might have to look into that one a little bit further as that relates. I don't know if Cody is here. I don't know if you have a comment on the contributions piece. It's a year-end entry that's basically true up for that piece, so that probably is not a major concern either.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Councilor Staley.
Sean, did I hear that right? Apartment building permits down by 38%?
Correct, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? One question I have for you, Director. When you look under expenditures by department, it looks like there's $26 million we haven't spent that's been budgeted. That's quite a number. Is there any particular reason for that, or what's coming with that, or?
Well, we usually come in about 97% expended through the year. So, I mean, we never really get truly expended, so we expect there's going to be a certain amount of holdbacks. Some of that is going to be that true of expenses when we accrue everything at the end of the year. So you do see a lot more that hits December necessarily than you might see in other months as we accrue up for the true end of year and the expenses for the whole year, if that makes sense. So you always make these accrual entries at the end of the year that true everything up to the year end.
That's money that'll be eventually going where it's supposed to, I'm sure, right?
Quite a bit of it, but there is an expectation that we'll have, you know, as we have in the past, we're probably going to land at that 97. I would expect at that 97% expended rate. Again, it's going to depend on how many more snowfalls we get this year, but so far the forecast looks pretty good for us. So.
Great, thank you. All right, next on the agenda, landfill license audit by Shauna Nelson. Hello.
Hi, good afternoon. Shauna Nelson here to present landfill licensing process audit 19-01. I'd like to thank the landfill management and staff, Public Works Management, the City Attorney's Office, Sustainability, and zoning staff for the cooperation and assistance provided during this audit. A little bit of background on the sanitary landfill. It's approximately 5 miles west of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and is the largest landfill in the state of South Dakota. It serves a population of approximately 280,000 residents in a 5-county region. The landfill started accepting municipal solid waste in 1979, and the projected closure date is 2077. The sanitary landfill is an enterprise fund, and fees are based on cost of service. Therefore, no sales tax dollars are used to fund the solid waste program. Revenues from the solid waste system fund the landfill, public drop-off sites, household hazardous waste collection, public education programs, and the environmental center related expenses. The purpose of the landfill hauler license is to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of residents and landfill employees through monitoring and enforcement of collection and transportation of waste. The table you see here identifies from 2015 to 2019 the number of licensed haulers, licensed trucks, and licensed units, which are included as unit roll-offs. This graph depicts the amount of tonnage that the landfill takes annually from 2015 through August of 2019. And if you look specifically at 2018, for example, the green bar reflects the total tonnage, which is 316,181 tons. The blue line represents the amount of tonnage the haulers bring into the sanitary landfill, which would be 206,877 tons. And if you look at that line that's bordered by the yellow, that replicates and depicts 4 haulers from 2015 through 2018, and that represents only 4 haulers, which is 68 to 72% of the total hauler tonnage that comes through the landfill. So we determined there are 3 objectives in this audit: the efficiency of the licensing process, verifying if adequate controls exist over the licensing process, and verifying if adequate controls are in place over hauler compliance during the operation after the license is issued. And this is what we found. For the efficiency of the licensing process, current requirements on the application are not relevant, are not used, and are unable to be validated when reviewed by city staff processing the application, as well as duplicate of information exists on the application. We determined the process is manual and could take up to 3 months to process, and there isn't any electronic filing or routing system used. For controls over the hauler licensing, Required signatures were missing, rate structures were not on file, and proof of ownership was not on file for several haulers. Controls over hauler compliance. We determined several controls were in place over the hauler compliance, which include monthly aging reports, monitoring hauler insurance compliance, recycling rates are being monitored and calculated, random load inspections are taking place, staff has the ability to refuse access to the landfill if haulers are out of compliance. We also determined the landfill staff does not have a consistent process in place to monitor weekly compliance. We determined the landfill is not enforcing the display of current licensing stickers required by ordinance. And although random content inspections are being performed, we determined inspections of the vehicles and equipment are not being conducted. We also determined that insurance paperwork was missing for the first part of the year for some of the haulers as well. And to our recommendations for this audit, we recommend that management review the information required in the garbage, construction, and demolition, hauler license, and permit application and revise it to only include necessary information that is required to issue a license. In addition, we recommend that management utilize the City of Sioux Falls website to enhance the customer experience and provide added convenience and efficiency for both haulers seeking a license and for city staff involved in processing the license. The management response to number 1 is taking action to enhance the license and permit application process. The landfill is currently working with the city communication team to simplify the application format to include the most pertinent information required of haulers to ensure they stay consistent with the rules and regulations set forth by the City of Sioux Falls. Second, the landfill will offer the application on the city's website as well as a hard copy to fill out for the 2020 applications. And by the 2021 license renewal period, the landfill will go full electronic, which will make it more convenient and efficient for the city staff and haulers. The implementation date is November 1st of 2019. Recommendation number 2 is that management implement an electronic document routing software and electronic filing to add security and to improve the efficiency of the landfill licensing process. Management response has reviewed the recommendation and is taking action to provide a more efficient and effective licensing process. First, the landfill started collaborating with the IT and communication teams on September 4th of 2019 to discuss integrating an e-routing application routing and signing process. This will speed up the process and make it more efficient for customers and city staff. Secondly, the landfill scale software paradigm include enhancement functionality in their most recent software version that will allow all license applications and additional pertinent documentation to be saved electronically for each hauler. These betterments will improve the security and efficiency of the annual license process. The expected implementation date is November 1st, 2019. Recommendation number 3 is that management establish written internal policies and procedures to determine the hauler licensing process requirements and responsibilities, ensure landfill staff are consistently monitoring and enforcing the requirements set forth in city ordinance that licensed haulers are to follow to obtain a license and operate under the license. The policies and procedures should include clear and consistent expectations that describe how and when tasks should be completed, as well as who should complete them, and include documentation, expectations, and requirements. Management response reviewed the recommendation and is taking action to produce necessary internal policies and procedures. The landfill is in the process of creating a hauler licensing standard operating procedure, SOP. The SOP will be detailed operating plans for every step from start to finish, and the implementation date is March of 2020. Recommendation number 4 is ensuring that an established process in place to verify the safety of licensed hauler units to protect citizens, employees, and other haulers. The Solid Waste Association of North America, the SWANA, SWANA, has identified developing a safety and health program as a leading practice in the solid waste industry. Management response includes, according to the South Dakota Carrier Enforcement Department, a vehicle or combination that has more than 3 axles and a gross vehicle weight rating, GVWR, gross combination weight rating, or actual gross weighting exceeding 26,000 pounds must pass an annual DOT inspection. The landfill will take the following actions. Require any hauler with hauling units required to have an annual DOT truck inspection to submit the most recent copy of the passing inspection results with a licensing application. It further reads, according to Lieutenant Joel Peterson with Carrier Enforcement, all commercial vehicles, regardless of weight, must pass a level 1 inspection. For example, if a commercial vehicle weighing under 26,000 GVW goes through port of entry and does not pass a level 1 inspection, it would be taken out of service until it meets the standards. The landfill believes inspections related to roadworthiness and safety of equipment are appropriately regulated by motor carrier enforcement and subject to insurance carrier requirements as a condition of liability coverage. The expectation date is March 2020. To conclude the management response, it's continued on page 12. The landfill does, however, have a responsibility to ensure the condition of equipment meets the requirements defined in ordinance. The landfill will take the following actions. The landfill will create an SOP starting first quarter of 2020 to help guide staff through a visual truck and load inspection process. Inspections will include inspection of containers to ensure they are watertight, inspections of containers in the proper closed position. All materials are carried within the container are in proper sanitary condition. A visual inspection of equipment for obvious mechanical issues to include leaking hoses. SOP will be completed by second quarter of 2020. Random load and equipment inspections starting third quarter of 2020, and the landfill will be ready to start visual truck inspections in accordance with the SOP by January of 2021 as a condition of the licensure. In conclusion, based on our review, we believe there are opportunities for improvement to address the inefficiencies and control weaknesses noted in the landfill licensing process. The recommendations are provided based on leading practices and will provide additional controls over the licensing process, as well as increase efficiencies for both license applications and city staff. Any questions?
All right, thank you, Shauna. Any questions, counselors? Counselor Erickson?
One question for you. First, thank you for, I appreciate the single page as well as the extra detail. I think that's super helpful. In your objectives, where it says determine if adequate controls are in place over the hauler operation, quite some years ago, I want to say probably 4 years ago, there were issues with allowing haulers to get a little bit too far behind. And some of them were shut down essentially and licenses pulled. And I mean, I'm being brief, but it was kind of a big deal. Were any of those things looked at with this objective, or was that not part of this?
No, that was part of the objective. They do have controls over the accounts receivable process, and it's actually pretty strict compared to what it was before. They have a monthly review of their aging, as well as a 30, 60, 90-day review. And they have the ability to, with the RFID and the software they have, to shut off access to the landfill now.
Great. Perfect. Thank you.
And to respond to that, I don't believe that they've had any problems since then. I think all the haulers are compliant and no longer in the rears.
Perfect. Thank you.
Counselor Staley?
Yes, thank you, Shauna. Back when we were at the end of that discussion about the company that had gone $125,000 in arrears, Mark Cotter's department came forward and they had some, I think it was an ordinance having them implement like an assurance bond that they were going to have to get the haulers. And I thought at the time another piece of that was going to be the inspection. And that was one of the few times in my memory where we had some garbage haulers in here, and we kicked off the first reading. You recall that? We did not let it go through. And I did alert those garbage haulers before that meeting that this was coming around the bend, because sometimes the affected parties aren't aware that an ordinance is coming. So I'm wondering what the correlation is with these inspections you're talking about with what that inspection was at the time. Sure. And at that time, I don't believe we passed that inspection.
That's correct. You didn't pass that inspection. And so currently, they are revising the application process to have an inspection in their inspection sheet for any vehicle over the 26,000 GVW. And that will be part of the application process. They are required by state to have that inspection. What they were bringing forward in addition to that is all the vehicles under the 26,000 GVW. They were bringing that forward to require an ordinance that they provide the inspection for all vehicles that enter the landfill. And so currently, right now, what they are abiding by is state
Okay,
state
but
requirements.
like this, have you been working with that garbage haulers organization? Are they aware that these things are being talked about?
They are. They are aware that it's being talked about. I believe that Donnie had met with them just last week to specifically talk about the audit.
And are they okay with it? I mean, they don't have. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Sale?
Thank you. I appreciate the audit and the work that went into it. You have a lot of recommendations here for organization that's been in existence for a long time. Could you comment about how you were received with the recommendations that you put forward?
Received by the administration, the department?
Yes, by the people at the landfill, because you've asked them to do a lot more paperwork here than they've done in the past.
We did. Actually, they've already started. The minute we had, during the engagement process, we usually keep the department in the loop on what we're finding, what we're doing, and they started right away on finding solutions for the recommendations.
Thank you.
It was well received.
Councillor Neisert?
First of all, good job. I know you have been under the weather and still are a little bit, so good job pulling through. There's a few things I wanted to call out for maybe the benefit of everybody, having seen this a second time. First of all, it is interesting you called that part out, that 4 haulers out of 27 or 28, give or take, are taking in something like, what was it, about 75% of the... Which is, so there's 4 that have quite the market share, which is very, very interesting. And that's just an observation.
And I can give you...
There you go.
A second. Yes, every year it's consistent with the 4 haulers. They have 68 to 72% of the total hauler tonnage that goes into the landfill, yes.
Okay, and one thing that I know you kind of looked at, it wasn't like a direct objective, but something that I think the administration is looking at, and I've encouraged them to look at, and I think you've maybe discussed with them, is, could we have some sort of process in place if we have a hauler that goes under, which happened recently, because we had, we as a city did expend funds to go pick up people's garbage. How much was spent on that did the city
Currently
pay?
it's approximately $18,000 to $20,000.
Yeah, so that's a pretty significant amount of money. So coming up with a contingency plan for if somebody, suddenly stops picking up garbage, that we have something in place where we can, and I just encourage them to continue to look at that. There was 2 really big overarching themes here, which was really kind of the paperwork, the application process, which I think they have very well in hand. And then the other one was inspection of vehicles, and Councilor Staley made reference to that. A few years ago we discussed that, and I can't remember exactly. I think the bonding was the linchpin that was really the thing that was really opposed. I'm not sure that the inspection piece was really that opposed. However, I will just say, you know, as a council, I think the inspection piece is really kind of in our hands to think about, because as you noted, the vehicles over the 26,000 pounds, which is some of the big trucks, they have to get a DOT inspection anyway, but anything under doesn't unless but they would be subject to, what was it, a level 1 inspection if they go through a port of entry, which in plain English means if they went across the border and then they came back, but they may stay in town and never be inspected. And we did have a case where our auditor was out at the landfill and one of the vehicles had its rear load box literally so rusted it fell off at the landfill, and I think, was that under the 26,000 pounds?
That's correct.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's just a matter of just thinking about whether we're okay with that, and we think we may want to have all vehicles inspected, or if we are okay with the risk. And that's really a policy question, and so it's something for us to continue to think about. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but.
To put it in perspective, currently we have 221 licensed trucks that are running around the roads currently, and of those, about 65 to 75 are under the 26,000 VW poundage. Just to give you an example, so every week or twice a week down every street, you have one of those trucks, 76 of them.
And maybe the last point is, I know that the landfill is going to do some sort of potentially, well, I don't remember, were they going to do any sort of, I know they're doing load inspections, but remind me where they were going to implement some sort of mechanical inspection? Because as we discussed, the people at the landfill, they're not qualified to be able to, you know, check brake lines and things like that. So even if they were, you know.
They were going to inspect the containers for the watertight, the proper closed position, that the materials were properly in sanitary condition, as well as a visual inspection of the equipment just for mechanical issues. So if it's leaking brake fluid or,
Sure.
you know, oil, things like that.
Yeah, and again, it's just a value judgment on our part of balancing the cost, because it would cost some money versus the risk. And, you know, that's a public, you know, it's a public safety versus the cost that they would maybe have to pass on. And, you know, whatever the right answer is, I'm not necessarily going to opine right now, but something to think about.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? Councilor Staley?
Question, Shauna, who are those 4 haulers doing?
I am so sorry. Donna, you can maybe help me, but it's
Waste management.
Waste Management, Novak, AOK, and Waste Connections.
That's
ACE.
And when we're talking about, and I think I'm certainly supportive of having checks and balances, are we talking about any increase in costs because of these new, okay, so that's good, cost neutral. And I am pulling the item tonight that I saw on the consent agenda talking about a 27% increase in a recycling fee. And I did talk to my garbage hauler, they're coming in tonight, but they are passing some of that cost already on to the customer. So as I think somebody just made a mention of making sure that we're not going to be, you know, piling up the fees.
Based on our recommendation, I don't believe there's any increased costs that are going to be passed from the landfill to the license hauler where we stand currently. If you were to change the ordinance to require all the vehicles under the 26,000 GVW, that would be an additional cost. However, they should be getting those inspections anyway.
Right, and again, it's always more reassuring to me when we have the industry involved with the conversation when we're doing that. So, thank you.
Anybody else? All right, thanks, Shauna.
Thank you.
Next up, we have a presentation on the Sioux Steel project. Welcome, Director.
Good afternoon, Council. Jeff Eckhoff, Planning and Development Services. So this afternoon we get to talk about downtown and what a downtown it is when you consider, I can remember when Falls Park was not a safe place to be. And we'll look at the work of past mayors, councils, city staff to get it to the point it is today. And so today we get to talk about what I consider an iconic site downtown in the hands of some very experienced developers. And I want to publicly thank Lloyd Companies and the Risen family for making this opportunity available to the city. We're coming to you with an a request for an economic development TIF versus one that, on a blighted site. Certainly it's allowable. It's one of the tenets under state law. It is consistent with our downtown 2025 plan that says, to stimulate economic growth, one of the action steps is to ensure that downtown can sustain economic growth. The City of Sioux Falls will work with both public and private sector partners to find creative solutions to design, finance, and construct high-quality development throughout the 2025 downtown plan study area. The plan also talks about walkability. Walkability is a product of density and connectivity, and you'll see that in tonight's presentation by Lloyd. And I want you to know that when TIFs come through our office or anything like this, they are taken very seriously. We're very thorough, we're very thoughtful. We've worked through the numbers with the company several times to feel confident to stand before you tonight. It's a big ask, but it's a big project. It's the largest project ever that was ever pitched downtown. And so even though it's a large amount, it's still, the TIF portion is 11.6% of the overall budget. 15% is kind of the mark we try to stay at or below when we're looking at TIF. So keep that in mind to the allocation. The process tonight is the first of 6 public hearings that will be held on this TIF, starting at the end of Jake's presentation. Dustin will get up and talk to you a bit about the timelines and some of those type of things. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Jake Kwasny, the Executive Vice President of Development for Lloyd Companies, who will take you through the project.
Thank you. Welcome, Jake.
Thank you, and thanks, Jeff. I want to start out by thanking the Risens and city staff for the Risens for this opportunity, but both the Risens and city staff as they challenged us through this process as we've talked to them about the project that we're proposing here. And then thank each of you. We've had the opportunity going back to March where we've talked about this project and what we were looking at doing, and then much more recently to talk about this proposal. And thank each of you for taking the time to talk about this. It is a big ask. It's a big project. We've taken it very seriously to make sure that what we have put in front of you here, it's real. We can step forward and do this project, and we're highly confident in it. You know, we've talked about these pictures. They've been out in the news. We've certainly had the opportunity to talk about it. What you have here is 7.46 acres that we have under contract with the Risens to redevelop. And they've had this site for 100 years. They've been producing steel products at that location, and so when we took a look at this, it was important for us to take a 100-year look forward at what this can be, to make sure when our future generations are sitting there at the falls looking back, that they see something iconic and that we got it right. So what we have here is a 217-room hotel, a convention center. We've created a very walkable urban alley that connects across to our mixed-use office tower. That's a 175,000 square foot building. And then 4th Street, again, focusing on that walkability and creating that downtown feel. It's similar in width to Phillips. It's gonna feel like a very natural downtown street. And then a parking ramp, which we're here to talk about a little bit. 930 stalls to service this development and accomplish the density that we're talking about. Ground floor retail with residential units above. So we've put it all in here. You've got hospitality, convention, office users, retail, really experience-driven concepts that we're pushing there, and then the residential components. And obviously to accomplish that, we need a place for all those people to park. So we've taken and surrounded a parking ramp here with a very attractive building. The other thing I want to call attention to on this site plan, there are several places where we interact with what will be public spaces. The public told the residents when they were going through public comment that they didn't want to be looking over the fence at what gets built here at the top of the falls. So it was really important to us to create concepts that drew the public in. And we have the Levitt at the falls and everything that occurs there. We saw the incredible success there this last summer. We've got Kiwanis Park, which you see there. It's going to be opened up. We want to make sure that that is something where the public can easily get in and out and access that space. And then working with the city to have some easements to create the River Greenway and make the top of the falls truly accessible. The city's also working with us to give us fire truck access around there so we can get emergency vehicles in and out of there. So you can see there's some parking on the city land. That would be improvements that we would construct, and that would be public space there, but we need it to be able to get the emergency vehicles in and around. Again, focused on accomplishing that density, getting that true urban neighborhood that we were going for here. These are the pictures. We're really excited about what this is, and you know, Craig said it when we were being interviewed with Kello. There's $2 million that we spent to build about 6 inches of plans to make sure that this is real, that this isn't just a pretty picture, there's substance behind it. We've worked in collaboration with all of the stakeholders to accomplish this, and we're very excited to start this project this summer. It's a 9-story office building. In total, there's about 139,000 square feet of leasable space in there. And when we look at this convention center, I just want to talk about that a little bit. It's certainly larger space than what we have presently downtown. It's smaller than what's out at the convention center. And so it creates a real complement to what's currently offered in the market, and we believe this will be attractive to not only events that might be sizing out of what we can do downtown, but also new events that aren't happening today. So we're excited to create that activity. You're going to see some slides here on the economic impact that we believe that activity will have, and we're just excited for what that can mean to the community. You know, we've talked a lot about the Power and Light District, the dairy block, those sort of concepts, the real urban walkable areas, and this picture highlights it, I think the best of any of them, where we've taken that urban alley. We're gonna have the restaurants and the coffee shops, those concepts that people can come down here and enjoy. It's a place that'll evolve throughout the day with the community, and we truly want it to tie into those public spaces. Here we're above the Levitt, that berm at the end of the Levitt along 4th Street, looking at the development. One thing I just want to call your attention to, when we sit here and we look at the parking garage, that building on the right of the picture, that is our parking garage. What you see of it is that black bump at the top is our stair tower. So we've taken and we've enclosed it with what I think is a beautiful building that will stand the test of time when we look at architecture and design. Quick at a high level, kind of the statistics on the development. About $75 million for the hotel and convention center. Again, 217 rooms. We've got a bar restaurant there that will service not only the public, but also our convention center. The office tower is about $43 million, 9 levels. And then we had to span up and over the sanitary sewer easement to create what I think is going to be a really cool, iconic restaurant down there right above the falls. Some of the details on the parking ramp. Total cost to build it, when you take into account land and site, would be about $24.9 million. We've requested a $21.5 million TIF in order to make that happen and drive this density. There's 930 stalls that could float or go up or down by about 15, depending on the number of electric stalls we have, handicap, all that accessibility that you start to incorporate in that, but it's right in that ballpark. And then you see the statistics there. We definitely have 100 apartment units above ground floor retail that we want to incorporate into that first phase. That last piece is the only part that's really not mostly baked, and that's the reason for that is we want to see what the demand is for office space before we concept that and have it be, make sure that it's successful based on the demands for the development. So want to hit at a high level some of the financial details on the project. $21.5 million TIF, and we've got $1.1 million in bid that we're requesting. You see the numbers there. Total project cost is $186 million. We've broken it out as to where that's going on each of the projects and some of the components. You'll see there we do have a line item for art. That was something, you know, working with the Rising family to make sure that not only do we have the activity here, but that we have the cultural concept, that we're tying that into the community. Sculptures, murals, music, that those things are happening here at the development, that it's driving activity and enhancing that experience for not only this development, but all of downtown. You know, these are when we look at TIF and the economic reason for it today, you're getting $56,911. We anticipate just within the boundaries of those buildings I put in front of you, that there will be $1.6 million in tax payments being made from our development. And with growth in that over the next 20 years, you see 2.5 would be what we anticipate the tax payment to be in 2040. So without your collaboration with us, the density and what's happening here gets substantially reduced, and we'd have to go to more of a surface level parking or maybe some single-story suspension ramps. But if you could even see half of what we have there, I'd be surprised when we look at it. And I also know that what we were challenged with by the Risings and the iconic nature of what they want to see here, I don't think that we would get to do anything. So we'd continue to get $56,000 a year on that site. On that parking ramp, you know, one of the questions that came up with some frequency was, how's it going to operate? You know, we're going to privately own it. It's going to be largely funded by your dollars. Our intent would be to operate it consistent with your city ramps today and into the future. As you change the way they operate, we just want to be consistent so that it looks and feels the same way and we're all on a level playing field. But, you know, daytime hours, it will be leased monthly. Nighttime, we will have a certain number of stalls that are set aside for the hotel and the apartments. But what we're showing right now at peak usage, working with Walker, they're saying, you know, we're 100 to 120 stalls over peak demand on this. Now, that does not account for the day when the Levitt has 10,000 people and I've got an 800-person conference going on in my conference center. We got a parking issue on those days, but everybody has a parking issue, but those are good days for any downtown community. And so we've maximized that investment to make sure that we've done it efficiently and delivered on really being good stewards with your investment in that. You know, I know one of the things that comes up from time to time is the investment and the management and who you're dealing with. And it's really the group you see in front of you here today. I've got our CEO, Chris Torkelson, Craig Lloyd's with me. Our team is invested in this in the long haul. So it's going to be a Lloyd enterprise entity that will manage the overall development and make the asset management decisions for the foreseeable future. That we're going to stand behind it and be a part of this. We've also been working with the CVB and various entities to figure out what are the opportunities we have to really generate revenue outside of just the property taxes. So obviously when we build, there's a whole tax on the materials. So you can see there, the city portion of that's $1.87 million for this project. Right out of the gate, that's going to occur in the first 2 years of the project. And then we step forward and we start looking at sales tax and various other components that table there lays out. And these are based off of per square foot averages that you see in similar spaces throughout our community. We anticipate generating for the city $880,000 taxes each year outside of the property taxes. In addition, some bid revenue that will go to the CVB bid at $117,222. So, I mean, those are the numbers that go beyond the fact that we are going to continue to make the $57,000 tax payment, and looking to the future, you'll substantially increase the property tax revenue on the project. We also were provided this slide by the Convention and Visitors Bureau. What this is, they measure the economic impact of the hotel. We provided them a third-party market study that was done by a group called HVS, which that's where we get the data on whether, on the performance of our hotel. They took and measured that impact based on the types of business that are anticipated from that, and the estimated economic impact per year of this hotel is $25 million. You know, I want to thank the Convention and Visitors Bureau for putting that together. I wouldn't have even known how to start to put that together, but I think that's a very significant impact that this can have on the community. Dustin's going to speak to the next steps for it, but it was very important to us as we approached the city staff on this project to make sure that there was time to talk about this. This is a big deal. We understand that. It's not something we took lightly when we undertook to do the project. And you know, look, it goes beyond the numbers, what the impact of this project is. It creates an experience for the residents of our community. And when you look to economic development and we look to grow, attract new businesses, you know, there's certainly great space here in this development for new businesses to set up shop and come to work. But even those ones that might be looking at our community in different areas, when people are relocating their business from Denver or from the coast and they look to some of the benefits of our community, one of the things they have to consider is attracting and retaining talent. And when you're pulling people from those areas who might have lived in a larger city, this experience and what we're going to offer, it contributes to that. And I think that has a major economic impact, not only 3 years from now, but it's something that will be attracting people to our community 10, 20, 50 years from now.
Good afternoon, Dustin with the Planning Department. Well, I don't have the exciting slides or the information that Jake just shared, but did want to go through just a couple of the next steps as we have brought TIFs forward in the past. And as we look at codified law, there's a number of steps that we have to take in terms of providing the public the availability as well as the council and the other taxing entities to take a look at the TIF request that's in front of us. A couple items I'll go through is just, obviously we received the application for TIF back in November, and early December, we did take the steps to go to the Planning Commission briefing in December and talk to the planning commissioners about the TIF request at that time, because one of the things with our planning commissioners and TIF request is that they don't, you know, they traditionally have rezonings and conditional use permits that they see on a monthly basis. They're very familiar with those. TIF requests obviously come very sporadically, and actually the last one we did was 2 years ago. And so many of the commissioners are new that haven't seen a TIF request come before them. And so what we set up in our process is that we essentially go to the Planning Commission briefing 2 months in a row. One, to kind of give them background on the TIF process and what they'll be looking at, but also a high-level overview of the TIF. And so actually not shown on the slide is on December 3rd, we did take that. That was a noticed meeting that we did talk to the planning commissioners about TIF in general, as well as the overall TIF request that was being brought forward by Lloyd Companies for this project. On December 13th, we did notify all of the taxing entities that are associated with this. So that would be the Sioux Falls School District, Minnehaha County, and then there is the East Dakota Water District that gets a very, very small amount of property taxes, but we also notified them. Between kind of before actually we sent those notices, we did have conversations with the school district and with Minnehaha County, and ultimately we did work with Minnehaha County, and we have the last few TIFs that we've done to collaborate with them to be able to bring a presentation in front of them to also brief them on the TIF request moving forward. So you'll see today, obviously, we're here at City Council Informational to brief you and the public on the request, but also on December 31st, we're scheduled to go in front of the County Commission at their normally scheduled meeting to provide the county commissioners a brief update similar to what you're hearing today on what the TIF request is and getting them the ability to hear the request. Ultimately, we'll have a notice of hearing that'll go out that will be planning on going to the Planning Commission on January 9th. So that's our regularly scheduled meeting. It's actually, so it's Thursday, January 9th. It's actually not on Wednesday, just as a result of beginning of year and holidays. There's a joint meeting on the 8th, so we'll be meeting on January 9th. And for that meeting, we'll actually be at the Planning Commission briefing again on January 8th, the day before, providing the Planning Commission an update at that time with further details of the two items that they'll take a look at. And I'll talk a little bit about those on the next slide. And then tentatively right now, what we'll be looking at is City Council meeting January 21st for the first reading. And then it'll actually be February 3rd, because that meeting was changed as well, for second reading on the items related to the TIF. So the items that'll be brought forward for TIF consideration are a resolution to approve the district boundary, a resolution to approve a project plan, and an ordinance to approve a development agreement that really highlights what the project is, the actual approved increment or the amount payable through the TIF and the duration of the TIF. The district boundary and the project plan are what go to Planning Commission for their consideration prior to City Council, and those are approved by state law via resolution. Our development agreement will actually be an ordinance because it's a distributing public funds. So those will be the three items that'll come forward, and we'll schedule those appropriately so that you can see the ordinance and the two resolutions on that second reading night, which would be that February 3rd night is what our plan is at this point in time. With that, obviously, we're excited to be here with Lloyd Companies to answer any of your questions. Jeff and I are available, as well as Jake, and we'll open it up for questions then.
All right, thank you. Questions, councilors? Councilor Sale?
Thank you. I've just got a few questions on this, and they're probably for Jake. Jake, did I miss a completion date in this presentation? A start date, a completion date?
We're looking to start the project next summer, and we would turn over, obviously there's a lot of pieces here, but our intention would be to open that hotel early 2022, basically January, February. The office would turn over for the tenants to start their build outs about the same time. Potentially the retail space is a little sooner on the ground level. That parking garage, we have to deliver that really at the same time. Obviously, if I'm gonna open up that hotel, I need a place for people to park. And our intention would be to have the shell of those apartments completed at that time. So we're really looking to have a lot, when you look at this site, coming out of the ground spring, summer of 2022, probably have to wrap up some landscaping during 2022, the summer there. You'll see this. There'll still be some work going on. We'll be doing build outs in the office building for tenants. We'll be finishing those apartments, hopefully turning those over to leasing in the summer of 2022. But we'll have businesses operating in there by the time we get to summer is our intention, 2022.
Thank you. Just one more question. In the past, I know that some developments downtown have run into issues with granite close to the surface. I mean, the rock is an issue. And also, this being an industrial site for 100 years, there's got to be some pollution that you're going to run into. I know there's been some issues in the past with unintended and unexpected. So could you walk me through the process of how you've determined where you're at with ground pollution?
A project of this nature has obviously a lot of bogeys and things that you're looking for, and that's why we've spent the last 10 months digging into those details. There's boxes of environmental data. We've done more borings here than we would typically have done. We saw that experience with what we did across the street at Cascade. So we've had a lot of opportunity to work up here, and what we learned from all of that is we definitely don't want to go down here. We need to go, we're going to bring the site up, so it's going to come up an average of about 3 feet across it. We're working with the state DENR. We've been very involved with them for the last 6 to 8 months, really getting an understanding of what needs to be done here, what steps we need to take to make sure that we've got a clean site that we can operate with in terms of their approval. And I think, you know, you can't take all of those out, but until we really go and start this project, we've done everything we can to mitigate those, and we know the things we need to do to address them.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Counselor Starr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jake, I'll start with you if you don't mind. One of the things that I'm curious about, did you do any projections for number of jobs created, and then maybe an average pay? I know it's going to be between the office buildings going to be totally different than, you know, a hotel, but, you know, what kind of job creation are we looking at?
We're going to cover the gamut of people that are working here, from executives all the way to service workers. And so, I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity being created here. There's a lot of small shop retail space. When you look at that, that's the opportunity. We are persistently named one of the best communities for entrepreneurs to start business. There's a ton of opportunity here to do that with great exposure for those operators. It's going to run the full spectrum. We believe we're going to have, in that office building alone, over 700 people working there. So those are, there's plenty of opportunity here.
Perfect, thank you. And I guess if I can, Mr. Chair, I'd add maybe more of a question, either Director Eckhoff or Mr. Powers, that want to talk about maybe the due diligence part of how do we go through the process of approving a Tif application. It seems a lot of numbers and a lot of things that are happening in a short amount of time, receiving the application in November, and then I think we wouldn't be here if you hadn't approved it and moved us forward. So take me through, what do you look at and how is that process approved?
Yeah, so, you know, after we received the application, obviously, you know, prior to application, there are a few conversations, you know, that happen about the project. Obviously, this project's been announced for quite some time, and I know many of you have had some of those conversations. So it wasn't a secret that this was going to be coming forward. And so, obviously, when we look at this, there's a couple different ways in terms of, first, if we step back and look at state law and how you can approve a TIF, there's really two things that you have to look at. One, either 25% of the property has to be considered blighted, or 50% of the property has to be going to support the general economic welfare of the state. And how that's defined is that there's a creation of industrial or commercial or other uses on the site that aren't currently there. And so obviously when we first take a step back, we look at, generally based on those very general requirements, can this qualify for TIF? And so that's what we first look at. Then we look at, in terms of, you know, talking with Lloyd, looking at, you know, the financial numbers that they have prepared for the site, obviously all the project costs, looking at this site and this project being $186 million. And to achieve that, you know, what are the public infrastructure or the improvements that are needed to be able to do that? And so obviously, when we look at this site and the, you know, eligible expenses, there's a number of eligible expenses that by state law we can consider. And ultimately, we'll have those detailed in the project plan that'll come forward to both the Planning Commission and City Council, but ultimately there's roughly around $50 million here of eligible expenses when you look at codified law and what's allowed under codified law through TIF eligible expenses. And so we first take a look at that. obviously working with Lloyd, we're trying to hone in from a city perspective on what's the actual need or what's the actual number that we need to look at to make the project happen as shown, as depicted. And so ultimately through those discussions, we get to the number that they've proposed with that, which is that $21.5 million of eligible project expenses. And so, I guess there's a lot of, things that we take into consideration as well. Some of the, when we look at this TIF, obviously there's a, if you're focused more on blight, there's typically, if we look back at the Cascade project, there was really a gap in financing because of all of the environmental contamination that's happening there. You can also look at TIF from an economic development perspective, and that's kind of what, we really see this TIF as Jeff kind of hinted at the very beginning of the presentation, was that, looking at this and how much economic development this is not only going to create for our local community, but also the state in terms of not just property taxes, but the sales tax, entertainment tax, tourism tax, all the things that this has provided. So all of those are key factors in what we look at. And I would say every TIF is a case-by-case basis. There's obviously different elements that we're going to be looking at for something that's related to environmental contamination versus here where we're providing infrastructure to support the density of the site. And really, looking, another element, just general element that we look at in terms of TIF and everything is looking at our current comprehensive plan and our downtown plan. One of the requirements of state law is that you have to be in conformance with those plans. And we really see, this site and this project really highlighting a number of the different elements that are talked about in our downtown plan. Jeff mentioned a couple of those items, but again, I can go into a lot of that, but I'll leave it at that and see what else you have for me.
If I can do one more and then I'll, tell me about who from the city specifically does the financial analysis, or do we use someone from the outside to actually look at the numbers when it all comes down to it?
Yeah, we can take we've taken a number of different approaches. In this case, we look at the numbers, one of the things that we look at in terms of, that we do in terms of the fiscal ability of the project is we actually took the documents, the construction documents that they had, and were able to provide those to the county equalization department that help us generate what that tax increment's going to be. And that really shows us, what, confirms valuation as well as, cost of project. We've done different approaches. I mean, we obviously, in the Planning and Development Services Department, we deal with building projects on a daily basis and know what, projects like this cost, in terms of square footage per, or price per square foot on different things. So, it all depends. We have in the past had outside individuals look at just the overall concept from a financial standpoint of, maybe things that we weren't as familiar with, and, in terms of environmental and stuff, when there's a lot of environmental work, obviously, like Jake said, they're having a lot of those conversations, but when a TIF request is for that environmental work, we have a lot of those conversations again with the DNR and stuff. So reaching out to those resources when those are the eligible expenses we're looking at. In this case, that's not the case, but so again, it's case by case dependent, but in this case, we did run through those numbers internally to the department, but also with the county equalization department to make sure the valuations are going to hold to what we would expect or need to expect to help pay off the TIF.
Perfect, thank you.
Councilor Staley?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say I was grateful I had a chance to visit with Craig Lloyd and Jake today, just to get some more information on this. And one of the things, there's a few things I just like some clarification on. One thing I wanted to say to the public, and I will continue to talk about this, but there seems to be some confusion from our citizens that they're comparing this parking project with our other parking project. And people are saying, well, we're going to invest in another parking ramp. And so I think we need to be educating people about the differences of this. However, today, Jake, and I think you told me that the price per parking space will be around $26,000. Did I hear that right? So they're doing it smart. And the difference that citizens have to understand is that that little black area, that this parking, their parking facility is running the whole length of their project there, and then they are doing the wraparound of the retail. They're just not building the hotel on the top. So in my opinion, they're doing it smart that way. They don't have to build a double reinforced parking facility to support the hotel. A question, one thing, and I said this to Craig Lloyd today, I'm going to say it, Dustin, you can come on up, please. But the thing, when we did the Cascades, that was a $43 million project, and the TIF was about $4.3 million, I believe. So to me, I was thinking it was like a 10%, the TIF would be the 10% thing. This is going over that. So is there ever like an equation that you use? I mean, could it ever be a TIF would be 5% of the project?
Yeah, so with the Cascade as an example, you know, that was a $4.1 million TIF on a $43 million project, so roughly 10%. What we're looking at here is a $21.5 million TIF on $186 million, which is roughly 11.6%. What we've traditionally looked at, I would say here at the city of Sioux Falls is like a 15% or under standpoint. You know, I would say that you know, that's not written in stone in terms of any community and how much you can approve or participate. So really, you know, we look at it from a standpoint of, you know, it's a participation rate, and usually we're between, you know, 10 to 15%. It could be less, it could be 5%, I guess. It just
you know what,
depends
do you
on the
recall what Washington Square was?
The Washington Square project, I know the TIF was approved for up to $2.9 million, and I think that project was around $30 million, so.
That was less than 10%.
Roughly 10% or a little less, yeah.
Okay. So that was just something I was wondering about.
One of the other things, you know, when you factor into talking about participation rate, you also have to consider the project as a whole. I mean, we're talking about a major project that factors in, you know, 7 acres of our downtown that's going to bring as much economic impact as maybe a couple blocks of our downtown in another area. And so I think when we talk about participation rates, you can fluctuate that based on, again, the case-by-case scenario that's brought forward to you.
Well, and we had the conversation today because, I mean, they were presenting the package to me as we're hearing it now, and I'm saying, well, how much flexibility do we have? I mean, as council members, we're hearing this, do we get to make recommendations to change anything? And I mean, it's kind of sounding to me like it's set in stone. I mean, at the end of the day, we either are going to approve what this is or we don't. So, I mean, so we're just being told this is how it is.
Well, what we bring forward and what we try to do as staff when we work through the application process and what we bring forward to you is we're trying to bring you the most defined TIF and hone down on what's the actual need here to make the project as shown happen.
Right. So I get that it's kind of, it's done. This is the final project. This is the final proposal. Another thing I think citizens need to understand is a positive is that the $56,000 that is already being collected in property taxes will continue to be the number collected moving in the next 20 years. Is that, or does that increase like everyone else's does with the increased assessment of the property? Or is that locked into 56?
The base value will be locked in at the value, but the mill levy will obviously could change that whole.
So and then when we're talking about they are going to start paying a sales tax in the revenue of all the businesses, and so that's not just sitting there like free and clear of the property tax part. One thing, as you mentioned earlier, blight, when I first became aware of TIFs, the word blight was very, very important because it was a tool used to develop an area that no one would really want to take into their project plans. This area does have some blight because the Seney Island channel used to run through there, and there's all sorts of, back in the 1920s, they were throwing all sorts of junk into the channel because unfortunately those people did not have a vision for the beauty of what that area was. The industrial era was taking over. So once again, we have to learn from our mistakes in the past. But, so the fact that there is a blight involved with this makes me more inclined to say this could be a good fit to allow them, this TIF to be applied. But I want the citizens to understand that what that means is that that money is put aside, and then they use that to help build the whole project. The city doesn't get any property additional, and then the county and the school don't either, right?
So, not completely correct, but.
Oh, okay, so how does?
So obviously, there's a base value that's going to be collected, and that's that
That
$57,000 roughly that Jake talked about. That'll be continued to be collected between now and the expiration of the
20
TIF.
years.
Yep, so that'll be collected and distributed to the 4 taxing entities as it currently is. What happens when we approve the TIF district is ultimately they're going to have construction and they're going to increase the value. Any of that increase in value creates tax increment. Ultimately, they finance the project up front. They pay, the county will continue to charge them for the new valuation. So the new valuation will be roughly $80 million. They'll pay that $1.6 million to the county. The county will separate out the base value taxes, that $57,000, and the $1.6 million roughly. That $1.6 million will be sent to the city to put into our account to then distribute to them to pay back their original investment in the parking ramp, which is those eligible expenses of $21.5 million. In terms of what happens to those other entities, so we have 4 taxing entities: the East Dakota Water District, the city, the county, and the school district. What happens in that increment value, so that $1.6 million, ultimately the city, the county, and the water district, yeah, they don't see those increase in taxes. But what state law allows is there's a state aid formula for school districts, and this is going to be classified as an economic development TIF because it's generating businesses on the site. And so because it's generating businesses within the district, it clicks on a state aid formula. So what that does is ultimately the state, through the state aid formula, will make the school district whole on the taxes that they lose out. So they're not losing out on any property taxes over the life of the TIF. The school district isn't.
So they will immediately begin to collect taxes on that. When this project is complete, they will be getting taxing on $189 million?
Well, the
school
valuation
district?
will be more like 80 million, but the school district, yes, will be made whole by the state aid formula.
So then that means the citizens of South Dakota
Correct.
are paying for, okay. And then lastly, what I want to say is that, you know, my dear friend Kermit Stagers, who just passed away, he was a strong proponent for TIFs. He thought everyone should have a TIF. Even, you know, homeowners, I mean, if anytime we could cut property taxes for people, that was a good deal. And so in that same vein, since he was a big mentor of mine, I'm saying that, you know, we're doing this for businesses in the downtown area. I'd like to see more of an effort to help just the people in residential areas, like the blighted areas we might identify, to give them some kind of property tax abatement, as we've talked about that program in existence, so that we're not just always talking about big business, but we're talking about the average taxpayer too, because we're all paying property taxes, and I've been hearing from people, they're getting squeezed on their property taxes. Their incomes are fixed, they're retired, and the taxes are going up. So we need to, as I said to Craig Lloyd today, we need to make sure we're thinking about everybody in our community as we move forward. So thank you.
Councilor Neitzer.
Just a couple of thoughts. First of all, this is going to change the face of downtown. One of the big things about this that I was thinking about was 2 words, which is risk transfer. And what do I mean by that? Public parking, or parking in a downtown, is infrastructure. You have to have parking. And we have set our rate structure in our parking division so that we can be peeling off enough money to make a bond payment every 10 to 20 years on a ramp. Even if our ramp had gone completely perfect, we're not in the position to build another ramp for another 10 to 20 years. We generate just enough money to, and that was by design, to pay a bond payment and then pay our expenses, or to be saving up to take on a new one. So the parking ramp would be done by a private entity. We wouldn't be taking the risk. We'll have public space enhancements. That's another big thing. A convention center, that would be a risk on our side. That's going to go to the private side. And so we're transferring all of this risk, and we're going to reap all of this reward. So it's a wonderful thing, having just been in San Antonio and seeing the Riverwalk. You think about the engagement between the public and the private and the amount of economic development that has taken place. And so it's very exciting because you don't see a whole lot of just unused area here. You don't see a bunch of surface parking. You see things going vertical, and you see a lot of tie-in with public space, and it's really well thought out. So I'm very excited to see this go forward. Thanks.
Councilor Kiley?
Thank you. Well, first of all, yes, I do agree with Councilor Neitzert's assessment. I certainly like the idea of benefiting from public parking with zero investment or zero risk involved. Could you clarify, Dustin, the amount eligible? I think you said $50 million of eligible expenses in this particular, or expenses were eligible for TIF in this project?
Yeah, based on the project, there's roughly 50 million. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but ultimately, state law calls out what project costs are eligible under codified law. And so when we look at a project like that, you know, really what we're looking at here is specifically the parking ramp is what the request here is for, but all the infrastructure improvements in terms of the 4th Street and the parking that's on street, as well as site improvements and just other things that are financing costs. All those are all factored into that roughly $50 million, and with the request, you know, being for the 21 and a half.
And once again, what's considered to be eligible, that's determined by state law. It's not an arbitrary amount that's determined by the developer or by the planning staff. So in other words, the developer is only receiving 43% of what is actually out there, of what the potential is.
Yeah, under state law, those costs are obviously called out. There's also the ability for the city to have discretionary grants or grant discretionary dollars. That opens it up a little bit, but we've really only focused on in the past historically those eligible project costs as defined in codified law.
Well, there's no doubt the impact that this will have on the city of Sioux Falls, the potential that it has on our citizens. I mean, when you just look at the one-time sales tax on construction materials alone, and then building off what Councilor Starr had mentioned, there's employees, there's construction workers behind all those materials as well too that are benefiting. All that money's going back into our economy, and there's going to be hundreds of other individuals that'll be employed in this complex that we see before us that will benefit the city of Sioux Falls too, and that is going to, their money will be spent here in the community, and so I do appreciate the fact that you're already $2 million into this and you haven't even turned a shovel yet. That again illustrates the risk that's involved on their part, and I appreciate that.
Anybody else? All right, well, thank you. So we move on to, if anybody has any public input in any of the topics today, you are welcome to come forward. Welcome.
Mark Weber. Mr. Bixler is my assistant today with 5 pages of information. I'm making comments about our 6% growth in 2% municipal sales tax. One of the things economists do is looking for trends. You really don't expect the finance department to do this, and I really don't expect them to, but I found a few things that at least I find fairly interesting. I know there are at least 2 people on this council that are numbers geeks like I am, so I hope I don't put the rest of you to sleep. This first graph shows what I give you on a monthly basis. This is in a graphical form of the Sioux Falls 2% municipal retail rolling growth rate. And all of the sectors are listed at the bottom. And if you were doing a pie chart, the percentage of this pie chart would be indicated by the legend that's at the bottom. What is most interesting to me, I'm only talking about one of these. Retail sales, by the way, is about 52% of the local economy. It's a little bit over half. Is this miscellaneous retail? In 2018, it was 18% of the whole. Through 11 months of 2019, it has grown to 20%. And look at that top line. What on earth is going on that it has a rolling growth rate that's now over 20%? It's just out of sight with what's going on with the rest of it. All of this analysis comes from State Department of Revenue, 1,000-page document you can do this with any city in the state of South Dakota. It's all broken down by standard industrial classification. This was instituted by the federal government in 1937. Obviously, internet sales were not part of that way back then, but I've sort of teased this out in saying that internet sales is part of this miscellaneous retail, and I'll get into that in a minute. So miscellaneous retail, as far as a two-digit standard industrial classification, is the number 59. Non-store retail is a three-digit classification, is 596. If you want to go to the next graph, this is non-store retail, 2% municipal sales tax. These are actual dollars for the city of Sioux Falls for the last 5 years. Ever since the Supreme Court decision, I think you can see that that blue line just doesn't agree with anything else that's happened in the last 5 years. The one outlier that is of concern to me is September of 2008. I don't know what that is, but you've always got to have one statistical outlier somewhere along the line. The next graph. This is an academic exercise. You as the city council and the city of Sioux Falls get all the revenue on the blue line. That is a 12-month rolling growth rate of retail trade as a whole. But you can also do a 12-month rolling growth rate. This is just an academic exercise. And you take out the influence of non-store retail. So what I'm telling you is that the places in Sioux Falls that don't apply to the state definition of a remote seller, all the retail that takes place in Sioux Falls, the difference between this red line and the blue line is the influence of internet sales in 2019. So basically, the retailers in Sioux Falls that have a physical presence here, they're basically doing a business at around a 2% growth rate, whereas you, as receiving all of this taxable revenue, it's actually growing at right now at a almost a 5% rate, which is still underperforming the overall 6% rate is what your finance director gives to you.
You're at your end of your limit here. How much time you got? We'll give you a little bit of leeway because I know you've tried to get in here for a bit, so.
Counselor Nensert asked our finance department in the September 29 report if there was a city-by-city breakdown in municipal internet sales tax. He responded that he was waiting for the South Dakota Department of Revenue to this, as it's only available on a monthly basis. This is the document. This is not my document. This one comes from the state. If you look at the bottom of it, that's the one that's the municipal portion of it. And now the last one is mixing apples and oranges. It's using the state numbers as a denominator and my non-store retail as a numerator. And what I've got there is only through October. I've got a number for November. But you can see what the ratio is. What I'm about to say might be controversial. Sioux Falls, on a statewide basis of absolutely everything that's taxable sales, we do about 29% of all taxable sales business in South Dakota. You can make a judgment for yourself if this ratio is going to increase, if it should stay where it is, or if it's going to decrease over time. But I think the retail environment has changed. And I think part of this presentation, which obviously is not going to come from the finance department, it's in what economist does. I think most of this is new information to you.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Anybody else? Okay. Can I get somebody to lead us in where we need to go here? Make a motion? Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm waiting for. Anyone?
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Hello.
I would like to make a motion to go into executive session to consult with legal counsel or review communications from legal counsel about proposed or pending litigation or contractual matters pursuant to SDCL 125-2 sub 3.
Second.
All right, ask for a roll call, please.
Council members Erickson,
Yes.
Hiley,
Yes.
Neitzert,
Yes.
Selberg,
Yes.
Sale,
Yes.
Starr,
Yes.
Staley, Brecky.
Yes.
All right, we'd ask everybody to please vacate and we will move into an executive session. Thank you.